Hi guys, this is Amar and welcome to Network Engineer Stuff. So guys, in this video we're going to focus on OSPF chapter 4, that is process ID. So in chapter number 2 we studied about something known as OSPF area ID. Then in chapter number 3 we studied about router ID, and now we are going to focus on something known as process ID. Now this topic of process ID, I would say that this is one of the most misunderstood topic while we are studying OSPF. So process ID, which is nothing but PID. So when I say PID, guys, it is nothing but process ID. So this is one of the most misunderstood topic in OSPF, and in this video we are going to understand this most misunderstood topic. So we'll understand what is OSPF PID, that is process ID. We'll understand why it exists. Why do we need this process ID? We'll understand that. We'll understand whether OSPF neighbors, in order to OSPF routers to form the neighborship, do they need the process ID to be matched? We'll see that also. We'll also see that can a router run multiple OSPF processes? And then I have an interview question at the end of this particular video, so which you have to answer. So OSPF process ID, which is PID. Now, why will you have an OSPF process ID? And of course, what is this process ID first of all? So let's say I have a router. So let's say this is my router R1. Now on this router, what I'm doing is I'm running OSPF. So when I say I'm running OSPF, that means there's some routing process which I'm running on this router, right? There's some OSPF routing process which I'm running on this router. Now this routing process needs to be identified. Okay, it needs to be identified by something known as iOS, which is the operating system of this router. Now there is an operating system on the router. Now this operating system needs to identify this OSPF routing process, and which is nothing but the process ID. So it is basically the name of that process which is running on that router, and this process ID is nothing but simply a number. It is identified by a number. So OSPF process ID is simply a number that identifies an OSPF routing process running inside that OSPF router. If a router is running OSPF, of course, the iOS internally needs some way to identify that routing process. So iOS requires that it should identify that OSPF routing process, and the identification is done by the process ID, which is simply a number. So let's move to again a very I'll say the most important point while you are studying the process ID. Always, guys, remember this thing, that process ID is locally significant. Process ID is locally significant. It is local to that OSPF router. So when I say it is local to the OSPF router, that means, let's say I have let's say an OSPF router A. I have another OSPF router, let's say router B. I have these two different OSPF routers. Now this OSPF routers, of course, this will have some process ID. Let's say this router A have some, the process ID of let's say 1, and a router B have, let's say, the process ID of 100 OSPF process IDs. Now this process ID information, now this process ID information is not exchanged between these routers. The process ID information, the process ID is not exchanged by this OSPF neighbors. Now, it is not exchanged. That is the reason why I wrote that it is not exchanged in any OSPF message. Any OSPF message. Do remember this. Process ID information is not exchanged in any OSPF message. Neighbors do not need to match this process ID. That is the reason why even if like router A have the process ID of 1, router B have the process ID of 100, still they can form the adjacency, because they are not exchanging this with in any OSPF message. It is local to the router. Process ID is something which is local to the router. It is locally used by the iOS to identify its routing process. That's it, nothing else. There's no other significance of having the process ID. So this is a very important thing. In most of the interviews also, guys, you will face this, that if I have router 1, router 2, router 1 have the process ID of 100, router 2 have the process ID of 200, will they form neighborship? Yes, they can form OSPF neighborship, they can form OSPF adjacency. So this is very important point to be remembered. Now again, another question. A OSPF router can have multiple OSPF process IDs. Can it run more than one OSPF process? The question is very simple, but again, most of the people do have this confusion that, how come that, this one router can have multiple OSPF processes? Okay, it should have only one OSPF process, right? No, that is not the case. A router can have multiple OSPF process simultaneously running on that router. Let's say this is my router. Okay, now this router, once I configure, like now the configuration goes like this: router OSPF followed by the process ID. Now the same router, on the same router I can configure like router OSPF 100. Now here we have two different processes, and now these two different processes have two different process IDs. So yes, we can have multiple process IDs. Now the question is that why we will have these two different process IDs? What is the use of having two different process IDs? I have written over here in this slide. It is basically used for separating the routing domain or management. So let's say on this router, if I need to separate the routing domain. Now when I say we are separating the routing domain, that means we will be having totally a different routing information in those processes. Those two processes will be having different SPF calculation. Those two having their own LSDB, that is link state database. So they will have this information completely separate, independent of each other. So again, here I also have written this particular, they do not interfere with each other. So when I say they do not interfere with each other, that means, let's say this is a process ID. Okay, this is a process ID 1. This is a router. Okay, this is my whole router. Now we have process ID 1, and this have process ID. This is process ID 100. Let's say. Now this process ID will have some routing information. Now this process ID also will have some routing information. Now this routing information is not exchanged between them. It is not exchanged automatically. But yes, we can explicitly, get it exchanged via redistribution if it is required. So this is what I have mentioned over here, that these are the two different independent routing processes. So when we have two different process IDs, those are two different independent routing process, each maintain its own link state database, SPF calculation, routing information. They do not interfere with each other. Routers do not automatically flow. Routes do not automatically flow between the processes. The routes are not exchanged automatically between the processes. If you want the routes to be exchanged between the processes, of course you need to do something known as a redistribution. So this is very important point to be noted. Configurational stuff, again, this is a command, as I told, that this is the process ID. Again, this is the process ID. You can see this is a numbers. Okay, I told you it's simply a number, nothing else. The network command and the other stuff, again, we will see it in our upcoming videos. I'll show you the labs, we'll perform the labs. At that time, I'll show you this commands and the significance of these commands. Process ID range. Now, this is the range of the process ID. We can have process ID starting from 1, and the last valid process ID is 65535, the 65,535. But again, in practically, if you see now, you will have this process IDs, some common numbers like 100 or some meaningful number. Now, when I told at the beginning of this video that this is something which is a most misunderstood topic, because there are a lot of misconceptions about this topic, about this process ID. The myth is that the process ID must match between neighbors. So we understood that, okay, even if the process ID do not match, it doesn't affect, they will form the adjacency since process ID is local. The second myth, process ID determines OSPF area. No, process ID and OSPF area ID, they are two different things. Areas are configured separately. Process ID is just a process identifier, nothing else. The another myth, higher process ID has priority. So there is no such thing as priority in process ID. If you see that a router have a process ID of 1, the other router have the process ID of 100, so the other router is preferred. No, it is not like that. It do not have any priority significance. Process ID has no functional significance beyond identification. It is just an identification, nothing else beyond that. Now, the interview question. Is process ID exchanged in hello packets? So guys, if you have watched this video till here, I'll request you guys to please comment the answer, yes or no, to this particular question in the comment section of this particular video. Is process ID exchanged in hello packets? So guys, that's it. This is what I wanted to show in this video of process ID. This video I've made maybe after a long time because of some reasons. But yes, I'm going to continue this particular series of OSPF, and this is chapter number 4. Soon we will go to chapter number 5, and so on. We will continue. So if you wanted to contact me, you can contact me on this WhatsApp number 8828002605. You can write me for free notes if you want on this particular email address, networkengineerstuff@gmail.com. You can visit my blogspot, my blog basically, networkengineerstuff.blogspot.com. You can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram ID is networkengineerstuff, and of course you're watching this video on YouTube channel Network Engineer Stuff. So guys, please do subscribe to my channel, and please give your appropriate feedback. I'll stop here guys. I'll catch up you in the next video. Till then, bye, thanks, and have a nice day. Thank you.